What are your thoughts on Trump?
Yeah, things didn't go very well for him last week. But
This week.
I think he's finished, isn't he? He's finished.
I don't know.
Yeah. You think he's so resilient? He might.
He has a sort of cockroachiness about him, because you think he's gone, but he just keeps coming back.
Welcome everybody to a Sunday roast, and it's only three of us today. We had invited some Brexiteers on, but what a shock and shame that they didn't turn up. Michael, can you please introduce yourself to the crowd?
Yes, I'm Michael Lambert, lifelong entrepreneur, and now an old bloke who rants on YouTube.
I love that intro. I'm going to introduce you in a second, Max. I do have a quick question, though, before I forget. Did you do a video where you read out mean tweets?
At the end of some videos, I read out some of the comments from some of my mentally challenged followers, and they're quite funny. Some of them are quite entertaining. The people who still think that Brexit is great because we took back control and all the rest of it. So yes, I do that sometimes.
Do you have one that particularly stands out as a?
Do you have a favourite?
Not that I can think of offhand. There are just so many of them, but it's the usual stuff, the get over it, FFS, and all this sort of stuff. And some of them are just so stupid. You can't believe that people are really so stupid, and that they'll watch a whole video and then tell you that it was a complete waste of time, or that they don't want to comment. One last week said he obviously watched the whole video, and then he said, I'm not going to comment on it. It's so awful. And you just think, have they nothing better to do? Can't they go and watch some cats falling off chairs or something? Or car crashes?
That's quite good.
Maybe they're civil servants and they're just trying to vent. I don't.
Possibly.
I love it how that they comment, which then actually improves the algorithm for your video by them commenting.
Yes.
Or the fact that they said that they're not going to comment by commenting on.
Yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is that these people who do make these comments, so often, in the majority of cases, either the spelling or the grammar is complete and utter nonsense. I mean, you have to translate some of them. It's obviously not the brightest people who are still supporting Brexit.
Did you? I think, Max, you did a video on this. I'm not sure if you made a video on this, Michael. Did you do a video on Jacob Rees-Mogg's comments on GB News?
I
get so confused with the anagrams.
Yeah.
Max, my wonderful co-host, please introduce yourself.
Max. So I'm Max. I run the Robespierre channel, and I talk about British politics and in particular Brexit. And I co-host the Sunday Roast with Alex. Alex, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Alex, also known as Political X. I'm an author, historian. I do a little bit of lecturing on the side if I can. And yeah, I just do the same as you two, rant. rant and the insanity. We were talking about insanity. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Max, what did your video contain when he was on that channel that we don't really want to talk about?
Yes, he was on the channel that would not be named. He was talking about how there are great opportunities for Brexit, from Brexit, and the opportunities. He's done this a few times now. He's mentioned supply side reforms, and he's talked about Solvency II. Now, I'm not an expert on this, but Solvency II, as far as I know, is an EU directive where they require insurance companies to have a certain amount of cash or money aside so that they don't become insolvent. And Jacob Rees-Mogg wants to get rid of that or change it in some way, obviously to increase the risk. Okay, it's about deregulation, and the same with the supply side reforms. It's about deregulating, and I've said this in the channel. I've said it before. There's two sides of Brexit. There's the xenophobia, keep the foreigners out. That was for a lot of voters. I'm not saying everyone who voted for Brexit was xenophobic, but everyone who was xenophobic voted for Brexit. And then there's the other aspect of it is the disaster capitalism. So this idea that let's just get rid of regulations, get rid of protections for workers, protections for the environment, food standards, product standards, get rid of all of that. Allow businesses to just do whatever the hell they want. Complete Wild West sort of situation. And that's what he was talking about. That's what he's done an interview also with Channel 4, and he was saying basically the same thing again. So when he's pushed on Brexit opportunities, he doesn't come up with anything that's actually a benefit for ordinary people. And you have to remember that back in 2016, Brexit was sold as a benefit for the man in the street or for the small business owner. And when he's pushed on it, what does he say? Well, we're going to deregulate. And how's that going to help businesses if they want to export into the EU? Because the further the UK moves away from alignment with the EU, the more difficult it'll be for businesses. That would mean more and more paperwork. This is something people don't seem to understand, is that, excuse me, if you're selling to a market and they have a particular standard, the further you move away from that, the more paperwork you'll have to complete.
Yeah, it very much feels like a Marie Antoinette scenario. And I am aware that she didn't necessarily say this comment, but it was connected to her enough that it caused damage. But it very much feels like want to have their cake and eat it. They want to deregulate, they want to diversify, they want to move away from EU standards, but they want access to the EU. And they're going, well, you've got to either align with us or go off and do your own thing. And when he talked in that interview about gene editing in food, I was like, right, well, they're going to definitely put up barriers to that. They will be checking our food if we do that, because they're very much adamant that you can't have genetically edited food or genetically modified food inside the EU. They don't want it. And they've also turned around and said on other issues that they don't want to have, like chlorinated chicken, which we seem to be obsessed with having, or at least the government seems to be obsessed with having. And yet it seems that the British public have no interest in chlorinated chicken because they know that means lower standards. But our farmers would also have to suffer from that because they're set at a higher standard in terms of how they look after their poultry and all their other animals. So it means that the US can undercut us. I mean, this is part of the reason why the New Zealand and Australia deal was an issue, because they can do steroid-injected beef, which we can't, which means they've got an advantage that we don't have. So either you lower our standards so we can do that, and it's interesting because I researched it. There's little evidence about the steroid being injected into beef as an issue, although putting in hormones, testosterone into an animal and jacking it up like that doesn't seem like the most sensible of ideas. It's actually what happens afterwards. It actually destroys the local environment because all the steroid runs out into the rivers and it just decimates the local populations because they can't handle that level of testosterone being flooded into the ocean. Michael, what are your thoughts on what we've said with Mog and what have you witnessed with Mog?
He's so clever. He does actually know everything, doesn't he? And he knows what everybody else does wrong. So I don't know why he's not leading us all into paradise.
We've got the lamp for that.
I just don't. Oh right, okay.
All hail the lava lamp.
As Max was saying, I just don't see the point in deregulating if it means that you can't export to markets where they have regulations. I mean, just isn't just crazy. What is the advantage? What is the argument for deregulation? I don't understand it. And as regards this beef business, I think we're going to import beef from Australia, isn't it, or is it sheep? I'm not sure. And then, with a bit of luck, our beef and lamb, which is better quality, we're going to export to America if we can get a deal. And what's the point of that? Could we just give the Americans the address of the people in New Zealand and Australia and they can deal direct? I mean, it's just madness, isn't it?
But there's also another aspect of this, not just the hormones and stuff like that. I received a comment on my channel about this, and it was from somebody in Australia, and they said, look, we have farms the size of Belgium.
Yes.
Okay, so how are British farmers supposed to compete with that?
Yeah.
There is a farmer that I'm aware of as a result of teaching online. There's a farmer in Australia whose farm is the size of Texas.
Really?
Their online education and their systems for long distance learning are so much better than in the UK because they had to do that because, I mean, your back garden's the size of Texas. It's not like there's a school nearby, is there?
I remember there was a show back in the 90s, like the Flying Doctors from Australia.
I remember that.
So it was, sorry.
What, they flew around and...
Yeah, it was like it was a soap opera or something like that, but it was like ER or Casualty in Britain, but it was called the Flying Doctors, and some farmer would, I don't know, put a nail through his arm or something, and they'd call the doctor on the radio, and then the doctor would arrive by plane.
Wow.
Little Cessna or something, but it was it just showed the vast distance that people have to travel. I have relatives in Australia, and they explained to me how just it's so vast that we can't even comprehend here in Europe.
No, I bet.
And on the Australian deal, George Eustace very kindly told us what a lousy deal it was last week. A deal, of course, negotiated by the wonderful Liz Truss. She's got quite a record, hasn't she?
And how is it only us that are hanging him out to dry over this? Like the BBC or Channel 4 or others are not. Maybe Channel 4 are probably doing it, but like, how is it possible that somebody who was a UKIPper joined the Conservative Party, became the Environment Secretary, was talking up this deal at the time, and now has turned around and said, it's crap. But I also think maybe the opposition party should be making hay with this,
shouldn't they, Gus? Gosh, shouldn't they?
I think Emily Thornberry did with the Japan deal. I mean, she ripped Liz Truss apart. You could see Liz Truss's face, like squirming and retching, and it was really like quite revealing. She'd obviously spent an inordinate amount of time trying to make sure that they did an analysis between the Japanese deal and the UK deal. And basically, the Japanese deal with the EU, if we just rolled that over, we would be richer, both in GDP and exports, I think by a couple of billion on both. Like 1.5, I think, on one and 2 on the other. So you're like, right, so we would be 3 billion better off. And Liz Truss had spent an inordinate amount of time trying to hide the stats that our own department had done to see where we compare. And this was, this is another Brexit thing. We were always saying we will be smaller. We will have less negotiation power. And the worst thing was we could have just said to the Japanese, we'll roll over, we'll just continue. But Liz Truss had to go on a hell-bent thing of no, ignore everything from the EU and their trade negotiators and what they've organised. We'll come up with our own plan, which was worse. And so you're going, right, well, that's another thing that we showed about Brexit not being beneficial. You've got 60 million people. You cannot negotiate as well as you have if you've got 400 million or 200 million or 300 million.
No, I was just going to say there's so many claims and counterclaims that nobody really challenges. And I think most people just zone out. They hear all this stuff and nothing really gets through. And to get the actual facts in front of people is very, very difficult because they're just contradicted with lies. And
I just did a video on the heads of the Bank of England coming out and what they had to say on Brexit, which was shocking. But to make that engaging content, they know their stuff, but to make it engaging, you've really got to. I had to really think outside the box and think about little sound effects and B-roll and everything else. It's not that easy. They're there for the numbers, not to come out and explain and justify policy in an engaging way. And it's not necessarily an engaging topic. So it was quite interesting to see, even for myself, that was a difficult thing to then shrink and edit in such a way that you could do it in manageable bites that people can appreciate what's actually going on and the effects of Brexit on our economy, which then comes into a bit of a segue with the autumn statement. What did everyone think of the autumn statement?
Well, I suppose it had been so much leaked, hadn't it? And I suppose we all really knew more or less what it was going to be. It was going to tell us how bad things were, whether things were worse or not as bad as we thought. I mean, the whole thing was really just so depressing, wasn't it? I mean, we're just in such a mess. And the fact that living standards are set to go down by 7% in the next 2 years, I know it's just frightening. And I think in many ways it's probably even worse. The things that stuck out for me particularly were when Jeremy Hunt said about Silicon Valley, and he talked about previous geniuses, and he talked about high wage, high skills. I mean, we all know this is just pie in the sky. This is like take back control. It's like all the other stupid slogans. we're not going to be ever Silicon Valley. I mean, the whole idea is just absurd, and it just seems a bit desperate to me. I mean, it's just so obvious that we're in a downward spiral, and I don't see any way of turning it around. And to increase taxes at a time when everybody's hard up and when interest rates are up and so on, doesn't look to me as though something that's going to turn the economy around. I mean, if there's a decline of 7% in the next couple of years, think of the thousands of businesses depending upon discretionary spending who are just going to go. Thousands and thousands. Restaurants, bars, hotels, anything leisure, it's all going to go. And I think also there are all sorts of other aspects, so I won't go on too long, but I think also it's about how people feel and people getting depressed. And I think there's going to be no end of mental health issues and all sorts. And it's just impossible to see how you turn this round. And I think whilst Hunt was limited in what he could do, because the situation is so desperate, it didn't leave me with any sense of optimism, I must say.
One of the Labour MPs came out and said, it feels like we're dealing with a pickpocket.
As I was coming into Westminster today, I read a timely warning from the police about pickpockets in the area. They warn, you may have an idea of what a pickpocket looks like, but they're far less likely to stand out in a crowd than you think. Yeah. They may work in teams to try and distract the target. And one of their tactics is where a thief will appear to be over-friendly while pickpocketing you.
Yeah.
Did it feel like that to you? Did it feel like that to you, Max or Michael?
So during the statement, there was a lot of cheering for Jeremy Hunt. And Jeremy Hunt, generally in the past, he's arrogant, of course, but he seems to be even more arrogant at the moment, especially when he's responding to questions. I don't know, is it maybe because he's in such a senior position or what? But in regards to the statement, there is this, okay, we're going to give people more support and universal credit is going to go up. I don't think it's going to match exactly with inflation. It might be a little bit lower. Of course, that's, it's helping people. But the problem also is energy bills. They're expected to hit 3,000 average next year. So whatever benefits people do, whatever people do get on the one side, it's taken on the other from energy bills. And the windfall tax didn't close the loophole as far as I know. So the loophole being, we're going to tax energy companies, but if they reinvest their money in gas and oil, then they don't have to pay the windfall tax. So yes, they've increased the windfall tax, but if and please correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, but as far as I know, the loophole still remains. So these companies at the end of the day don't really pay anything.
So Kate Andrews was on Question Time the other day and said that this loophole's been left open for companies like Amazon to reinvest their profits back into the UK. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. I've got my own views on it, but I'd love to hear what everyone else thinks of that idea.
But they don't do that. they move their profits out of the country so that they don't have to pay tax on them. There's always this thing that really upsets me, is that if you're an ordinary person working, there's no way you can avoid paying tax. But if you are a multimillionaire or if you have a large corporation, there exist loopholes. The government know about these loopholes. The civil service know about these loopholes, and they're not closing them. Why are they not closing them? They know about them, and they can close them, but they decide not to. And it's always this thing of, if an ordinary person working, if you don't pay your taxes, in some cases you can't avoid that because it's taken directly from your wages. But if you don't pay your taxes, you'll go to prison. Yeah. But if you're a multinational corporation, or if you're a multimillionaire, you can either just pay an accountant to help you get around these problems, or you can move the money into an offshore bank account or into a tax haven, and you can avoid it. And the government know about this, but instead of squeezing these people, they will squeeze the ones who can't avoid this.
I do know a little bit about this. I think as far as HMRC are concerned, I mean, they're obviously under pressure. They obviously haven't got enough resources and so on, but they go after easy targets. If you're on PAYE, as Max says, there's no way you can avoid tax. But if you run a small business and you want to avoid tax, it is very, very easy. You can avoid everything. There are people who come to this country from other countries. One group I know of from a very corrupt country who set up a whole chain of businesses. They don't pay any tax. it is just so easy to avoid it. And HMRC take one look at it and they say it's too much bother. We can't go chasing after all these people. And they're getting away with millions and millions and millions. It's a huge scandal, but it is very, very easy to avoid tax because HMRC just want the easy pickings.
Labour pointed that out in the Autumn Statement. They said there's loads of tax fraud that's happened. You've shut down the investigating company from HMRC, or not company, but group that you originally set up to investigate this. Why are you allowing that? Because it sets a precedent as well. It's not just that you lose that money. Other companies can turn around and go, oh, they don't care.
That's the point, actually. I mean, these people I just mentioned, sort of come from another country. One business sets it up and then they just find it. They don't actually come here thinking we're going to evade tax. They come along and they find you can get away with it. And so they tell their friends and they tell and suddenly you get it spreading. And suddenly everybody knows that you just do this and you do that, you don't pay any tax. And more people are doing it because you just get away with it. We're losing so much tax from businesses that just don't pay it.
Wasn't it in the 1970s where 80s as well, I think, where HMRC used to send around a tax person to the house?
Exactly, yes.
Oh, right, you didn't include this. Right, tick, bang, right. Yeah. Pay us that money and we're off.
Yes.
They just kept you on your toes.
Yeah.
It's almost like there's no one keeping an eye.
Yeah, exactly.
They want to keep an eye on everything else. They want to keep an eye on the borders. They want to keep an eye on people committing crimes in the street. But white-collar crime?
Yeah.
It's almost like they can't, it's over the top of their head. And it's shocking and it's wasteful. And you're going, there are so many tax loopholes.
Well, they haven't got the time, have they? They don't have the time, the resources to look into stuff. I mean, that is the problem. And I've no doubt they spend a lot of their time on sort of gender awareness courses and health and safety and all the rest of it. There's so much bureaucracy that really isn't. I mean, the core purpose of HMRC is to collect taxes and make sure people don't evade taxes, but
also, as you're saying, they don't have the resources. And it was Jacob Rees-Mogg last year or earlier this year saying, we need to cut 80,000 staff from the public service. So obviously they would lose staff as well. Yeah. So, they don't have the resources to follow up on these things.
And yet that's the thing that will make you money. And this is the thing I've always felt with these guys. I don't think they know how to make money for the economy. And that's why we're in such a mess. I personally think that with the training, I think that is important, but so is the other stuff. And actually what you should be doing is both. You should be orientating yourselves towards that. That means investment. But with that investment, you then get it back.
Yes.
It's the same. It was interesting as well because Jeremy Hunt made a small comment as well. One of the quickest and easiest ways for us to save and make money is sticking solar panels on government buildings and making sure they're insulated, but also on top of that, making now sure that they're shaded. This is the other thing that isn't being discussed. We've got temperatures going up to 40 degrees. We've got some morons on TV saying, oh, it's fine, go out on the beach, it's 4 degrees, it's great. And then obviously getting into the air-conditioned cars and air-conditioned houses. We had 2,300 excess deaths over that 3-day period because of that lack of appreciation of 40-degree temperatures being awful. The government even could have just said, all shops are to close between midday, which is a standard practice around anywhere else in the world. When it hits 40-degree temperatures, everyone just shuts. And all the government had to do is just start initiating that policy and go, look, shop for those 3 hours and we'll give you extended opening hours later on in the evening so people can shop later and then you don't lose any money. And I'm looking at this and going, he made a brief comment about that, but I bet nothing really is going to happen. I don't think there's any teeth behind it because it was such a one-sentence response to them doing that. Yet, if you've cut cost by insulating buildings and then you've turned all the buildings into money producers, where the solar panels are generating money for the house, it flips the model of what that actual building is, because most buildings are a cost. If you've then flipped it around and turned it into an income, you've solved half the problem with the building. It almost becomes self-sustained. That money can get reinvested into insulation or whatever else. And the shutters, even something as simple as that, or maybe it sounds like such a small thing, but if you work out the number of government buildings all across the country, or civil service buildings, whether that's schools or police stations, fire stations, all of them could be income generators for the government, or they could all be saving money from all these small things that they could do from some basic investment. I just look at them and go, I don't think they're good when it comes to working out how to generate revenue for the country and the government. Happy to hear people come back at me and say, no, total nonsense.
You can say about the whole of public service and politics that there's very, very limited business experience within those organizations. And I think that is a big problem. On the question of solar panels, I agree with you. I don't know why every house isn't being encouraged to fit solar panels on their roofs. I don't know how it is in Italy, Max, but
in Italy, the as far as I know, the recent regulations and legislation was that all new properties must have solar panels on them.
Right.
But it's also the insulation as well, so they must reach a certain standard. And a lot of the new houses going up are almost at the level of passive homes, where you don't actually need any energy from the grid, because if you have enough solar panels and the insulation is good enough, you can pretty much run the houses autonomously in an autonomous way, so independently. So yeah, but this requires legislation. It requires politicians to make decisions.
In one of our videos with Allshorts, he said he worked in construction in the UK, and there was some level of energy saving required. Allshorts claimed that all that you needed to do was put in energy saving light bulbs, and that would count as an energy saving product or installation inside the newly constructed building.
Like, there's a thing also that is a consequence of Brexit here, where there are EU standards. So there are different levels. Like, you know, like when you buy a light bulb or you buy a new TV, there's a standard, an energy efficiency standard. They also apply it to homes. So, you know, if you're buying a home or you're selling a home, you can actually say, okay, can I see the energy efficiency standard? And of course, the higher the standard, the higher the level on that standard, the more valuable the home is. And because the UK has left that, it wasn't actually a requirement, but they left this standard behind. And I don't know if they're going to replicate it, but that would be very useful. So, you know, if somebody wants to rent a home or buy a home, they say, okay, show me the efficiency standard. And if it's low, then, you know, it's going to put pressure on the landlord or the owner to increase that, because you could have as legislation, you can't rent a home unless it has this level of energy saving. You know, there's so many things that the government could do, but they don't want to do.
But in the UK, it seems you could rent a home with black mold, allows children to die, nothing happens. The government, I very much feel, at least for the Conservatives, I can say, they're very reactionary. They have to let something bad happen to get into the news before they do something about it. They're not very forward thinking. I mean, you can see that with Brexit. They were told what would happen in the future, and they went, no, that won't happen. Project Fear, turns out it was all true. And now we've got Project Lie. Got Project Gaslight taking place, which we've seen all over the place. Every single news interview is complete gaslight, which is in many ways actually compounding the problem of Brexit. If we'd at least admitted what the issues were, maybe there were some other resolutions. But if they're not even willing to talk about the problem.
The way you deal with problems is by facing into them, not by pretending they're not there. But I want to give people the confidence that we are actually doing that.
Would membership of the single market boost growth?
I think having unfettered trade with our neighbours and countries all over the world is very beneficial to growth. I have great confidence that over the years ahead we will find outside the single market we are able to remove the vast majority of the trade barriers that exist between us and the EU. It'll take time. There's a transition as you deliver something like Brexit, which obviously people have voted for and we must make a great success of. But I think the bigger question you're asking is Brexit the cause of some of the problems that we're facing today?
Actually, I'm asking a forward-looking question, because being in the single market is not the same as being in the EU. And would membership of the single market be something that would boost growth and change our current economic outlook?
I don't think it's the right way to boost growth, because it would be against what people were voting for when they supported Brexit.
I find it very interesting with Vietnam. I was teaching the topic the other day. You look at the Gallup poll, issues of Vietnam and whether or not Vietnam should have been invaded. The poll is like very much 50%. But as the years go on, it just drops. I think it gets to somewhere between 30 and 25%. And Gallup just stopped doing the poll because they're like, well, this is already done. But we're seeing this now. We're at, 57% think it's an awful idea, and 30% think it's like, we've got a similar thing happening with Brexit. The majority of the population clearly hate this and have come to realize that Project Lie was taking place during the referendum.
Like, if you look at it from the other side, so on the British side, you had the Brexiteers. No, it's not so much devil's advocate, but it's on the British side, you had the Brexiteers saying everything will be wonderful. Boris Johnson saying, we don't need to prepare because, there won't be disruption, stuff like this. There was this constant lying. If you look on the European side, back in 2016, 2017, the European Commission was saying, we need to prepare for a hard Brexit. We don't know what's going to eventually happen, but we need to prepare for the worst. The Irish government started investing money in ports, Rosslare in particular, to avoid the land border, the land bridge, which is what normally would have happened was trucks would leave Dublin port, they would go to Holyhead, they would exit Holyhead and travel all the way down to Dover and then into the EU, into Calais. But because of Brexit, they knew that this was going to be disrupted, so they started investing in ports with direct connection to France, and now they still use the land bridge, but there's been a big shift over. But that was because the Irish government said this is going to be disruptive. We have to prepare for it. And I'm not saying because the Irish government were doing the right thing, or they made some mistakes as well. But the attitude was, this is not good, and we have to prepare for it. This is going to be disruptive. We have to prepare for it. And the problem was on the British side was the British government said, no, we don't need to prepare for anything. They're not going to impose sanctions on us. They're not going to impose border controls on us. Jacob Rees-Mogg was blaming a few months ago, Jacob Rees-Mogg was blaming the French for not turning up at the port to carry out checks. Instead of they were told there will be checks, and he was saying back, a few years ago, no, there won't be any checks. And then when the French staff were not available or they didn't have enough staff to carry out the checks, or I don't remember exactly what the specific problem was, his response was, well, this is because of the French. Like, there was never any, okay, this is going to be disruptive, we have to prepare for it.
This is you and I speaking in June 2018, when I asked whether there might be queues at Dover.
There'll be no need for checks at Dover, but it will be an ability to ensure that the roads keep running around Dover, even if there are delays at Calais. The delays will not be at Dover, they will be at Calais.
The delays will not be at Dover. You'll be aware 2 weeks ago it was actually declared a critical incident. Some people spent 12 hours in their cars, lorry drivers passed out, and children defecated in the lay-by. A response to what you said some years ago, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Well, the response is that the delays are caused by the French.
But you said there'd be no delays at Dover, Mr. Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, but they are French-created delays.
But they are at Dover, Mr. Rees-Mogg. Are you prepared to apologise that you got that wrong?
Yes, of course I got that wrong, but I got it wrong for the right reason, if I may put it that way.
I was going to say that I think one of the reasons we didn't prepare was I think that politicians right at the top and so many other people just never believed it would actually happen, right to the very end. If you look at our present cabinet, we've got 30 people, 19 of whom voted to remain, and they never wanted it to happen. And so it was a question of putting it off, just hope it doesn't happen. And eventually, everybody knew it was going to be a disaster, and suddenly we have a disaster, and that's why we just simply weren't ready for it.
So much could actually be done if Jeremy Hunt came out and said, "Yeah, Brexit is a disaster. Now we need to fix it."
That the way you deal with problems is by facing into them, not by pretending they're not there. And I want to give people the confidence that we are actually doing that.
At least there would be, at least you could have some consensus in Parliament, because I think if the Conservatives came out and said, yeah, Brexit is a disaster, we need to fix these problems. We need to work with the EU. We need to align with the EU. Look, even from an ideological point of view, I know they don't want to do this, but just be honest about it. And I think you would have the Labour Party come out and go, okay, yeah, we're going to support some things to try and undo some of the damage. But Nobody wants to admit it.
But as you know, Max, no politician can ever say we were wrong. And for them to come out and say, they're just going ahead with this, knowing it's wrong, is like, you've had a vote on which route you take to get to a certain destination. You know you're going the wrong way. You know you should turn around and go a different way. But everybody, no, we all voted, so we've got to go on this place is just this route that's leading us to ruin.
Right. No, Nick's right. I mean left. Yes, this left. Oh bugger. It was that left.
What?
Turn around. Or indeed, don't turn around. Just carry on. Yes, onwards. You have arrived at your destination.
What's really so frustrating for me is the attitude of the Labour Party. They cannot criticise it. They've had this open goal for the last 6 years, and they could have said time and time again, pointed out how they don't necessarily say they're in favour of returning, but just pointing out what's going wrong. But you can't mention Brexit. Brexit's like it's like using the word Macbeth in the theatre. I mean, you can't mention Brexit. So nobody's saying anything. And the Labour Party, they're absolutely adamant. No, it's all done and dusted. It's all done and dusted. We've decided to choose the road to ruin, and let's get on with it. Let's move on.
This is why it's interesting that Caroline Lucas came out and lambasted Jeremy Hunt.
The Chancellor said he'll be honest about the challenges we face, so it is frankly extraordinary that he could speak for almost an hour without once acknowledging the economic catastrophe of Brexit. According to the OBR, it will slash productivity by 4%. It has delivered a 15% drop in trade. It'll be 14% in investment. It will increase food prices by 6%. It'll deliver lower wages, workforce shortages, and the highest inflation in the G7. When will he actually name the elephant in the room? When will he start to actually address that and reverse some of the damage that it's doing?
But then, again, I'll play the devil and go, what other policy is there for the Conservative Party to have? Their whole flagship is Brexit. So if they turn around and say it's a disaster or it's not working, how does that win them votes? The only alternative is to deny. Actually, we just haven't done it quite right yet. We're close. Give us 10 years and it'll work. I mean, that's Dominic Cummings, by the way, who actually said that. He said, give me 10 years and you'll be bringing me champagne.
You said that, and that's correct. But how many things have they U-turned on already? Like, how many things have they said, we're not going to raise taxes, then they raise taxes. We're not going to cut public services, now they've cut public services. We're not going to do X, and then they do the opposite. Like, this thing of, and I agree with you, it is their flagship policy, and they don't want to U-turn on Brexit. But they've U-turned on everything else. And, at least U-turn on this because it would actually be useful. They said we're going to hire 20,000 police officers. They didn't do that. We're going to build 40 new hospitals. They didn't do that. So if it's okay for them to lie about these things, why can't they be honest about something else? I
think the reason is that it's a sort of cult thing now, isn't it? But they can't go back on Brexit, the Tories, because they've got the ERG in the back, who just will not under any circumstances consider or admit that Brexit was a failure, and that's the problem. I mean, the ERG have held the government in the palm of their hands for throughout, haven't they? And Brexit has destroyed four prime ministers already, and it will destroy this one. And if he's not careful, it'll destroy Starmer as well. I mean, it is just a sinking ship, and the longer you cling on to it and pretend it's all going to be great in the end, I mean, the more difficult it's going to get. Somebody has to get up and say, "Look, this is wrong. We're going the wrong way. We've got to stop and have another look and see if we can find some way of at least trying to do some sort of business with the EU rather than just treat them as some sort of enemy territory."
That the way you deal with problems is by facing into them, not by pretending they're not there. And I want to give people the confidence that we are actually doing that.
And until that happens, I think we're just going to go on sliding down and down and down.
I would ask anyone listening today, please tweet at Question Time and demand that you have someone from the Rejoin EU side on Question Time. The only person I've seen is Ian Blackford from the Rejoin EU side. And that's it. I haven't seen, and Caroline Lucas, but I believe the Greens are sort of still umming and erring about it. But for the Greens, this would be a no-brainer. This is what they should be pushing for. And Caroline Lucas, as I said earlier, came out and lambasted.
Why can't they have somebody like the IEA on, and they won't have Richard, our friend Richard from Rejoin EU?
Don't forget they had Farage on there 38 times, the second most highest number of appearances. I mean, that made him really question time.
It feels like the BBC are only finally starting to change this because they can't avoid these questions, which people are bringing up now in question time. They weren't going to talk about Brexit, but two members of the audience popped up and said, we want to talk about this. And suddenly Fiona Bruce turned around and said, okay, right, we're gonna talk about this and brought it into the topic.
I'll tell you something very interesting about the BBC and their attitude towards Brexit. They haven't mentioned it for ages and ages and ages, but Laura Kuenssberg on her programme last week had three panellists there. It was Paul Johnson from the financial, what I can't really call his organisation, and it was Simon Sharma and the editor of the Financial Times, and all three of them were quite strongly critical of Brexit, and that's the first time I've seen any programme where the BBC has actually put on.
Laura Kuenssberg has changed since she started her own show. It seems when she was in the mainstream shows, she was very much. Yeah, the Tories are doing everything right, pretty much, and we don't mention Brexit. Now I don't know, it's maybe she's freer to talk about these things, I don't know, because she has her own show. But maybe we can segue a little bit into immigration, because I think this is something that, we also need to talk about what's happening at the moment. So the French have been given some more money. To do exactly what, Michael?
Have a party, I think. Parties. I mean, they must see this coming, mustn't they? The money we've pumped into France to try and stop these people coming. I mean, it's just crazy, isn't it? Just think about it. The French have got all these people hanging around who want to go to England. What incentive have they got to stop them? Why would they stop them? And clearly their efforts to stop them are very half-hearted. All they want is at the back of them. They don't want to hang around. If you ever go to Calais, I've been there many, many, many times. Every street corner is all these guys who come from Africa and the Middle East and so on hanging around. They want to see the back of them.
But also they don't want to be in Calais. They don't want to be in France. They want to be in the UK.
They want to leave. The French want to see the back of them. We're paying the money to keep them there. I mean, it's just utter madness. I just don't see how they're going to solve this problem. It's not possible. And now we hear that you've got these Albanian gangs, haven't we, that are organising these the trips across the channel. And a lot of Albanians are now coming. Well, you can't, to catch these people, our authorities are not clever enough. We don't have enough resources to catch them, even if the French would let us go and investigate. And the French don't want to investigate. It's the whole thing is just so ridiculous. But this is what happens. I mean, I'm constantly seeing on Twitter Farage putting things about, look at this load of people came across yesterday, all the numbers and all the rest of it. I mean, it's a direct consequence of Brexit. Because as a result of Brexit, we've shut the door. There is no way of coming to the UK legally unless you're brightest and best and all the rest of it. Even then, you could probably just struggle. But you don't want foreigners coming here. And so people who've got relatives here or speak English and so on have an incentive to come here. Use the illegal routes or so-called illegal routes. And it's, this getting tougher and tougher on them, treating them like criminals. It just isn't going to ever work. And whether you've got Patel or Braverman, then none of them's going to sort it out.
There is a way of sorting it out, which would be to set up processing centres, legal routes in large capacity that can then process these people and make sure, if you're a refugee, right, great, you can come over. But they won't set them up. I mean, if they were really that concerned about the boats going over, I think you said this, Max, why don't they just get a ferry and just ship them over and then they're not risking their lives? Well, they won't do that because it'll just incense the far-right elements within their party, and which are, from what we can tell, are significant, or the xenophobic parts of their party, which are in significant numbers.
They've already been, sorry, just to interrupt for a second, they've already been branding Border Force as a taxi service. Even Farage was saying that it was like a taxi service. So yeah, as you said, if we were to put pressure on the government to to send ferries over, the far right would go completely insane.
Which is just...
This is the point of the processing centres, because then, you've got this adequate area. You could easily set it up with the amount of funds that they're pumping in, and you can make a really good decision in the processing centre that's hopefully equipped for the numbers, and you can make an actual decision as to whether or not they can apply and move to the UK if they're legitimate refugees. We're seeing that the numbers are somewhere in the region of 83% are legitimate refugees. Yet the news is focusing on all these other groups, and it's very interesting as well, because it's you're looking at all the other problems, and it's funny how the news has moved on to this when the other problems that have been created by Brexit and like the government's awful physical handling of the UK. The thing that comes to my mind is do it legitimately, do it en masse, do it to a high standard, and a lot of these problems seem to dissipate. Or you'd instantly cut out all the gangs. If you did it for free, that would go instantly, because they wouldn't be able to make any money.
But the problem, Max, is
you've also started to resolve some of the other issues.
Alex,
people just lying on the beach and going anywhere they want without any regulation is an issue for everyone. The people coming over, there's every chance they could be kidnapped, they could be taken away because there's no record of them. They could be forced into slave labour, and we're finding that throughout the UK at the moment. Sorry, Michael, you wanted to say something?
No, what I was going to say is that if you go to live in another country, especially if it involves a tortuous journey, you're likely to be somebody who's pretty ambitious, pretty determined, and pretty bright. A lot of these people are very well educated. They're better educated because they've got the money and so on to pay for these journeys and so on. And the idea that all these people come here and then they're told to go in a detention centre where they might be there for 5 years, or no, they stay in 5-star hotels, don't they? These grotty hotels, 2-star places that people can't get rid of. Anyway, they're told they can't work for 5 years. We're desperate for labour. And amongst all these people, there are no doubt all sorts of the brilliant people that Jeremy Hunt was talking about yesterday, all sorts of potential geniuses, all sorts of people we could use. And yet instead we just say, wait, because we've got to do the paperwork. I know somebody, I've mentioned this in a couple of videos. I know somebody who was at university here. When he graduated, he applied for a leave to remain. And they said to him, yep, okay, we'll look at your case. He comes from the Far East and he doesn't think he's going to get right to remain. He thinks he'll be sent back. And he says if they do send him back, he's quite happy. It's fine. He's ready to go. 5 years he's been here. And from the start, they said, you cannot work. So the very first day he went out and got a job. He's got 2 jobs now. He's got a car. He's got a flat, the lot. And he's never paid a penny of tax for 5 years because they're processing his paperwork.
So this is an interesting little cycle that I mentioned last week, because Theresa May and her impression was that people were coming over to gain work, so they stopped them from getting work. Now there's a move within the population being like, why aren't we putting them to work? Because they're costing us money and they could be contributing to the economy instead. So you've got this. So then they'll go back into work, and then people will start complaining about them being in work and that they're coming here to work. And you're like, oh my God, it doesn't resolve the issue. And then I'll just say this quickly. I've seen stats claiming there are about 500 doctors waiting in these centres that could be working in the NHS instead. 500 doctors. I don't know what that is for nurses. We could have thousands of nurses waiting that could be going into the NHS, earning money, saving lives, and they're just sat there in limbo, in purgatory. Sorry, Max.
Yeah, but also the point, one of the big problems is that when you hear about from the Tories that, look, we have all these job vacancies, companies are begging for workers, and we have all these people on universal credit, people who are on benefits who are not working. We need to force these people into doing these jobs. Of course, many people can't do these jobs for many reasons, disability, or they don't have the skills, or a big problem I think that many people don't talk about is location. So there's a job in the north of England and you live in the south of England, and you're not going to relocate. But if you're a refugee and you want to rebuild your life in the UK, you have less of a tie to the location where you are at the moment. So you're more likely to say, look, if there's a job for me in the north of England, I'm going to relocate there. And it's absolute insanity that you don't allow refugees to work. Like, they shouldn't be forced to work, but they should be allowed to work. And the point that you raised there, Michael, that there's somebody who is working, but they're working in the black economy because they have to work. They have to survive. They want to rebuild their life, but the bureaucracy is not allowing that, and especially during a time when there's a shortage of workers and skilled workers as well. Insane.
I've got a segue. I haven't seen anyone pick this up, but Braverman and the Tories are using Trump language. Remember the invasion he claimed of the caravan?
Yeah.
And then you saw the pictures, and there was like people in little toy cars being pulled along, and you're like, doesn't look like an army to me. Or, carrying like very little on them, or the frail, the young, little children. And something else that happened when you read what part of the reason why people were moving from Central America is climate change. They can't. There's no arable land to work on anymore because it's been knackered. And the irony of that is that the US is pumping all this pollution, damaging the environment, and then forcing them to move. And it's like, well, you're complaining about the problem you're creating. Like, obviously, there's other reasons. There's political reasons for people to move. There's the idea of the American dream and being able to move for that. This doesn't make any sense. There's no difference here. Like, there should be a huge economic plan, obviously in cooperation with the North African states, being like, how can we boost your economies? How can we improve your arable land? How can we shrink the Sahara Desert and make it arable land, which are possible. Like, there's lots of evidence and already experiments being done to show that a lot of that land can be converted into arable land. It takes time, but it can be done. So the segue is, and we've only got 5 minutes left, Trump, what's his chances of getting back into power?
I think a few weeks ago the probability was pretty high, and now it's much lower. I still believe that he still has a chance. I think he's done a lot of damage to his party. He has this cult following that keep encouraging him to run. So he's definitely, I believe he's going to run. And I think the Republican Party don't want him to run because he's going to create a lot of problems. And there is a risk really that you could get to some sort of primary where it's DeSantis, maybe if he's going to run versus Trump, and Trump, you're going to have a really contested primary, and you could end up with maybe Trump winning it, but losing the election, because I don't think he would win the election, but he could win the primary because of the sort of cult status that he has. And, it depends. I think it really does depend on the media, but the media is turning on him. The right-wing media in the US is turning on him. So it depends on...
Post said at the bottom of the page, Florida man makes announcement.
I had to fold it over so you can see it. It says, Florida man makes announcement. And then, perhaps worst of all, see page 26.
Because I think the whole process for 2024 is probably already beginning. So the campaigning will start pretty soon. And Trump is somebody who's never stopped campaigning. So if he starts to have a number of big rallies, I think it could turn it for him to win the primary. But once again, I haven't been following this. I'm not an expert. So maybe there'll be people in the chat shouting, "No, you're wrong. You're wrong."
Yes, I think there are a lot of parallels between him and Boris Johnson. I think public opinion is turning, and I think people, after all this time, are perhaps a lot of people having second thoughts. There are always the crazies who will follow these people whatever they do, both Johnson and Trump. But I think he's finished. I think both of them are finished. Actually, I think too many people see them for what they are, just charlatans and liars and con men. And I just, especially as you mentioned, Max, with DeSantis in Florida, he doesn't look like quite a credible and competent guy, and I think he'll take too many of Trump's followers. And I think there's always this thing hanging over him about the invasion of the Capitol and claiming that he didn't lose the election and so on. That more and more people, I think, are beginning to realise that it's just, especially with the media turning as well, that these people are just frauds. And so I think he's finished.
I've got a couple of things. 54% of the Republican Party, I think it's about 54% of the Republican Party in the latest poll, are backing Trump. DeSantis is second, but only with 24%. So then it comes down to all the others. And there's some surprising names in that list as well. Dick Cheney's daughter, Liz Cheney, she is looking to run. I think she had like 8 or 9%. which is, you know, that's a substantial amount to start campaigning. But the other thing is, yeah, the campaigning definitely has started. Were you aware that people were being forced to stay in Trump's speech?
I actually saw people trying to leave and people leaving early even before he was done. He's still speaking now.
We are a nation in decline. We are a failing nation. We call it the China virus. Some people call it other things.
He started with the China virus. He started with, poking names at DeSantis. We've heard that, and people are tired of it.
They actually started preventing people from leaving.
And people are just saying, it's really boring. There's no energy. Where's his... And I wonder if there's just this element of modern society. You've got to come up with something new if you're going to rerun a campaign. You've got to show a new element. You've got to show a lot of energy still, especially as he's 79.
Mm.
You know, that's actually quite important to show that element of vigor, to dispel those ideas. Oh, he's getting a little older, and da-da-da. There's also clever little one-liners that you could do. Ronald Reagan did it quite successfully in a speech where they commented about his age, and he very, very charmingly came back and said, I don't want to make this whole campaign about the youth and inexperience of my opponent. which is, yeah, it's like, wow, it's actually a bit harder to dislike the guy when he can come up with like clever, witty lines like that. It was just really, I'm really surprised that people were actually trying to leave and that they blocked them. Almost like, had they actually planned that Trump's speech was going to be so low in energy that they were going to force people to stay inside the room?
Maybe they saw people leaving before, and and Trump was pretty upset about that. You know, you're supposed to stay here until the end. You know, like the cult meeting. You don't leave the cult meeting before the end. And all hail the lava lamp. And as it's a cult, maybe and all you need is, like, if you have one or two people leaving, the others look and go, why are they leaving? And then if you see more people leaving, then there's this herd mentality. If a lot of people go, this is something that some people could do. Organize a busload of people to arrive at a Trump rally, and they just shout, "This is boring," and then just leave. And this would, and because of the herd mentality, a lot of people, if they're dressed like with MAGA and all this rubbish, they would go like, "Why are those people leaving?" Some people will, of course, stay, but it would be embarrassing for him. But that's the sort of political games you could play.
That reminds me of Gandalf being like, "You shall not leave."
You could say that Keir Starmer was going to be the fourth, but unfortunately had to pull out.
Or Suella Braverman. She often doesn't turn up.
We could just say a Brexiteer. I don't know if we could get away with saying a specific name, because would that cause a storm?
Maybe, yeah, because what if the person said, yeah, but I wasn't invited, so why are you saying that I was?
Yeah, or we could, are we big enough that they care?
Probably, possibly not.
We could talk about immigration and the French agreement.
Yeah.
Which I think is a joke. I think they're just taking our money.
Yeah, of course they are.
And
the amount is the amount when the amounts of money we're talking about for so many things these days are such vast amounts. And what is it, £9 million to help stop people coming across? Just ridiculous. Absolute joke. I think they must be having lots of parties in France and the police.
Pretty much, yeah. Gee, English.
Here they come again. Let's get some more money. Yeah.
It reminds me of that scene from the Holy Grail. They think we've got the Grail.
No, it wasn't. That wasn't me. I don't.
I did a response video to Jacob Rees-Mogg on GB News. I also did another one for this morning. Yeah.
Sorry, Max. I've got to introduce you, and then I'll get you to come. Sorry.
Okay.
There's no production value here.
I was wondering who that was. I said I was wondering who that other guy was.
There's There's only meant to be two of us. Max, my wonderful. But, another segue to this is we're at the end. We've got to leave.
Oh, no.
No. Right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.